Fantastic. Okay, so welcome everybody to the next episode in our Future of the Built Environment series. Got a great topic today and a fantastic panel. Today we're going to be discussing innovation or extinction. Is this the last stand of the city centre? So obviously we've seen a seismic shift in working patterns since the COVID-19 lockdowns, and far fewer people travelling into the city for work. And this coupled with the pivot in the retail space of everyone going online, away from the high street. What does this mean for the city centres? Are we on the verge of extinction, or innovation needs to happen? So, will those office blocks and shopping centres of today be the sort of vast data centres in a dystopian city centre ghost town, or have we got something more brighter to look forward to? So I'll let the panelists introduce themselves shortly. Just quickly from me, I'm Alex Whiffin. I'm a co-founder and managing director of Cherry Pick People. We're a talent consultancy. We specialize in talent solutions for the real estate and prop tech markets. We partner with businesses, both large and small, in helping them with their talent processes, enabling them to identify, engage and retain the best people. So that's a bit about what we're about. I'm personally very interested in the digital transformation of the built world, and specifically the impact technology can have to have a positive impact on the world at large. So really excited about hearing about this topic in general. So just before I get an intro from everyone, I want to make this the most sort of interactive session I can. So please do post your questions on the chat, and I'll field as many as I can to the panelists. While the guys are introducing themselves, please maybe just say hi and let us know where you're coming from, where you're watching from. Be great to get that engagement. And but yeah, let's get started. So Rosie, do you want to give us a quick intro? Tell us a bit about your background and your angle on the city centre.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Alex. So I'm Rosie Haslam. I'm Managing Director of Street Sense UK, and we essentially offer strategic consultancy around place, everything to do with creating great places. So that's place visioning, place strategy, place making, and place branding. So essentially understanding the unique essence of a place, how we can create it great for its people, everything from a scale of a single building to a whole mixed-use city centre.
Fantastic. Cal, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex. So I work at a company called Propeller AI. So we're an Australian prop tech business. We started up about 5 years ago. Personally, I've got a property background, so I've spent about 20 years in asset and development management for companies like Macquarie Bank and Charter Hall, a large REIT here in Australia. And we started up Propeller AI because we were really looking at new data sources and deriving new insights to help inform and support some pretty big property decisions and placemaking and city shaping decisions. So we worked together with a team of data scientists and mathematicians to look for those new data sources, ingest heaps of different data from different places, but not overwhelm our clients with reams of it. We draw out insights, and actually actionable insights, to help inform and support those, big sort of property and placemaking strategies.
Fantastic, thanks, Cal. And finally, Kieran, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'm Kieran. I'm Planning Director in CBRE's London Planning team. And my focus on my work is sort of working in town centre uses and their repositioning, and also sort of alternative uses around education, research and development, such as life science, and other living products such as build to rent, co-living, student accommodation. So all really have a big role to play in the shape and future of city centres.
Fantastic. What a fantastic panel. So let's get stuck into this. My first question is, what are the primary factors driving the evolution or decline of city centres in the 21st century or now? I mean, I've mentioned a couple of things, but let's really understand a little bit more about that. Rosie, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Okay, I might actually start by almost slightly coming at the question in a slightly different way, or even unpicking the question itself. So yes, you've mentioned some of those forces that we're now facing. So the rise of online shopping, post-pandemic, working from home, slow, albeit increasing return to office. But I think actually, before we even get to those forces, we have to understand the nature of city centres in and of themselves. And actually, I believe it's the ability of those city centres to evolve which will determine their success. If these city centres cannot evolve, then those are the ones that are going to decline. And really what I mean by that is, how resilient are these city centres in terms of their makeup, their usage, their land use? Traditionally, city centres have been these very vibrant mixed-use destinations that, yes, were about commerce, they're about finance, they're about retail, but they were also about so many other things. People lived there, people worked there, people enjoyed these spaces with culture, leisure, all of these things. But over time, they've become very monofunctional. So, the CBD that you mentioned, the central business district is just that, it's business. Some of the city centre retail high streets are very over concentrated on retail. So what this means is this kind of monofunctional setup of a city centre means it's not really resilient to some of these changes and forces that we've seen, the ones we've mentioned, the pandemic and kind of the shift in the way that we're living our lives around retail. So with the impacts of those changes, these city centres aren't able to evolve. They're over-concentrated, too many eggs in one basket, you might say. So, for example, if we use the pandemic, the kind of working from home idea and force that happens upon these city centres, fewer people coming back to the office. All of the ecosystem that has been built in that city centre is very shallow, if you will. There's not enough support for everything that happens in that city centre around the office worker and the office usage. So, the office worker comes in, the amenities that are provided in that small ecosystem are, to grab a coffee on the way into work, to go for a sandwich at lunchtime, to have a drink with colleagues after work, or to meet friends for dinner after work. So the kind of retail, food and beverage, hospitality is wrapped around the office worker. Other amenities and services might be, the key cutter that you get, that you go to on the way to work in the station, or, the dry cleaner where you get your suit dry cleaned. Those services are so dependent upon the office worker that actually when the office worker is no longer there, or is there less of the time, then those services fail. So you begin to get this kind of downward spiral, and that's the decline. There's bigger conversations about the urban doom loop. That's kind of an American academic coined the term, but that's talking about the much bigger impact that you then have. Decreased office usage or increased vacancy, you get decreased tax revenue from those offices. Increased vacancy of all of those, retail, F&B, cafes, etc., decreased tax revenues from those services. Public transport down, decreased tax revenue from public transport. So that actually even the local authorities can no longer provide the services because there's not enough of an economy sustained there. So that's the doom loop. That is all doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be like that. There are ways. I think that's what part of today is about, is saying what's the positive, what's the opportunity in all of this. But I think essentially the question is, have our city centres become too over concentrated on one type of space, one type of use, and what can we do now to try and diversify them to kind of counter that decline? So that's really what I think that the primary factor, or the primary issue is really, how is that urban centre made up?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Cal, do you have any sort of thoughts on this, given your sort of data that you've got and that sort of thing? And
well, look, being a data nerd, I'll just start by sharing a graph. Let's cut to the chase. What we've done in Australia for our two major cities here of Sydney and Melbourne is actually monitor return to office trends in the major CBD office buildings in both cities. So what you're looking at here is a graph of the Sydney CBD. We call it worker activity. There's probably a whole nother session that we can talk about the way to measure this and the right metric and terminology and allowing for workspace ratios and vacancy rates. We tried all of that for about 6 months and then just ripped up the book and said, everything's changed. We have to come up with a new metric. So what we've actually done is measured occupancy at a pre-COVID level. And we've just called that 100. That's our baseline. So the week ending 21st of February 2020, we've said that's 100%. So every week thereafter, and this is a weekly metric that we've come up with, is then expressing that weekly percentage of worker activity compared to that pre-COVID level. So for example, you can see in the week ending Friday, the 11th of June, 2021, it was at 58%. Sydney then went into a really long lockdown towards the end of 2021, which you can see here. Everyone was sort of released and allowed to come back to the office. And then guess what? There's other, drops and troughs. I like that. I'm going to run with that in the future. You can see here from just holidays, right? There's the Christmas holiday period, and likewise Easter in April. But if you just step back from it and say, okay, we didn't have any lockdowns in Australia after 2021, you can see that gradual return here. People were used to working from home 5 days a week, and then they've come back, and there's our Easter holidays in April. Compare that to the rebound in sort of January 2023, for example. Look at that sharp increase back, and then the same things happened here in 2024. That behaviour has clearly changed over time, where workers just come straight back to the office after those Christmas breaks. But if you drop all of that for a minute and just even think about what's happened, imagine a trend line running through there, which we've done in presentations before. Office worker or return to office is in the Sydney CBD is still continuing to increase. We saw a little bit of a plateau here that begged the question of, is it about 70% at about where the new normal has landed? And we've seen, February come back to 65% in Sydney there. Will it continue to trend up and stabilise at about that 70%? We don't know, but certainly over the last couple of years, we can see that return to office trend continuing. If you even break it down by day of the week, let's have a look. I'll just add that in there. You can see Monday down here in brown at 43% versus, the other days of the week. Interestingly, we've all been speaking about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday return to office. Sydney's actually had Friday, which is the green that you can see there at 67%. Fridays have really returned in terms of office workers coming back to the CBD in Sydney, whereas Melbourne is still very much lagging Mondays and Fridays, and therefore that weekly worker activity that you saw before, Melbourne is lagging behind Sydney. So there's a whole lot of different reasons as to why workers are coming back or not coming back to cities. We've all, to Rosie's point, also seen when we've analysed precincts like the city core of the Sydney CBD, as Rosie was talking about, with all of the best office buildings in Sydney, fantastic retail, amenity, train stations. Those areas are trending even above the CBD average. Areas with that sort of amenity are going really well. You head further away from those areas to areas with more spread out retail, perhaps not as good a public transport amenity. Maybe the office building qualities are dropping to B grade and C grade office buildings as well, and the worker activity declines there as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight as to what we do and some of the trends that we're seeing here in Australia, because it's also probably reflective from things that I've read from overseas of what's happening around the world as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, really insightful in terms of, that worker footfall, sort of returning to the work, and the Monday particularly dropping off. Obviously, no one wants to go to work on Mondays, right? But yeah, so yeah, that, I mean, obviously that's really insightful to see that. Are there other factors that we haven't considered yet that are having an influence on that? I mean, Kieran, what are your thoughts about the sort of the main factors driving this evolution or decline?
I think sort of Rosie touched on it initially, that when we think about the decline of city centres, we kind of sort of almost go to, is it really more of a decline of the retail spaces that have kind of sort of shifted our mindset towards understanding why city centres might be sort of suffering, and with the items like the pandemic that have come into play, has that really just accelerated the pace of some of these trends which were sort of starting to emerge, and sort of magnified the impact of the change in retail habits, etc., and sort of propelled that into sort of fast forward motion. But, as Rosie was saying, cities are much more than that. They're valued spaces and places where people want to meet, socialise, work. And they're multi-layered, and I think that really goes part to some of the data that Cal was having about why people are really coming back into those city spaces, having the option to work hybrid or remote, or also that kind of attraction to be able to come back into work, into the office, and what that actually offers people in terms of a social or experiential environment for them to sort of make their working life as fulfilling and positive, as it can be. But I think that, for cities to remain relevant and thriving, they do need to involve, they do need to have a competitive offer to keep people coming into them, because, people are what make the spaces thrive, be successful. And we do need to respond to changing patterns of behaviour in society around patterns of work, patterns of retail and shopping habits. We obviously know the increased relevance of online retail and functions. People also want greener cities, and the importance of climate change and how we're sort of planning and responding to that in a design perspective or from a sustainable travel point, moving to more lower carbon environments. Cities serve many things and many people, and need to do a lot of things, and in the end there's a lot to grapple with for them to remain successful. And we can sort of see the kind of unequal kind of recovery of cities kind of across the country, really, and where some of the most successful places have the investment, have the capability to adapt and renew and reinvent themselves, whereas some of the cities and town centres may need sort of a catalytic investment in terms from government intervention through sort of the Levelling Up Fund or the High Street Fund, or to sort of really inject that renewal into them to make them into more sort of thriving spaces. So I think there's a lot to consider, but I think in terms of the office space, I can certainly reflect on what Cal was saying around sort of those lower grade office buildings becoming potentially redundant, and actually the quality of office space is so important for employers to be able to give the type of workspace that they want to have, firstly, that attracts their employees in. Where do they need to be? They need to be in the right places, right locations, and sort of what happens then to those outer office locations, which have less of a role to play in serving employment needs.
Yes. Why are you going into the city? We've got to think about what is the purpose of, as a worker to go in. Is it more collaboration and that sort of stuff? You don't just have to be there to sit at a desk. What are the reasons for doing that, and then design our workplaces or city centres accordingly. We've had some great questions, by the way, and thank you for sending those in. I will definitely field a few shortly, but just before, we're on with you, Kieran, I'd love to get your understanding or your input on sort of how urban planning can adapt to ensure city centres remain vibrant, sustainable amid these sort of different dynamics that are coming about. What are your thoughts in that respect?
I think it probably draws together a lot of what we've talked about so far, and I think it is the concept of being able to build resilience of cities over the longer term. So really understanding that social and economic context that these cities sit within, and being able to create strategies that are sort of viable for delivery and that account for sort of medium and longer term needs and requirements, whilst being able to embed flexibility and adaptability in them, because they do need to have the capability for evolving and change and renewal. And I think some of the measures that have been brought in through statutory legislation in the UK that have sought to try and help with that has been, one of them has been around the change to the use classes order in 2020, where there was a kind of amalgamation of a lot of the commercial, business and service uses under the new Class E use. And with that, what it enabled was existing buildings that fell within those definitions. So whether you're an office building, retail space or leisure, etc., enabled you to lawfully then move between different uses without directly applying for planning permission to change the use from, say, office to like a food and retail hub or etc. But obviously you need to check the restrictions on your site, etc., to ensure that you're capable of being able to, implement that. But that's one way in which it sort of creates a bit more freedom to enable change to happen. And I think one of the other ways that I think legislation has sort of helped to seek to make use of sort of redundant spaces is a relaxation around the office to residential conversion. And there's been a bit of relaxation on that more recently with the new updates to the Class MA. So being able to, repurpose office buildings into residential, but there's obviously certain requirements and tests that need to be met to be able to achieve that. And, in the face of a housing crisis and affordability crisis, really trying to renew and, make use of these spaces to sort of address different needs that are so prevalent in sort of today's society.
Is that something we've seen? I don't know if Rosie, you could, or Cal might have it. You have an input on this, but that change in usage from commercial office space to residential, is that a trend that we're seeing in terms of the city centres?
It's certainly a huge trend in terms of people exploring it as an opportunity. I think, as Kieran said, there is a housing crisis, and so there's an imperative to even consider it. There's also the economics of it, thinking, okay, well, if my office isn't working, how can if I repurpose it as residential, is that a better way to kind of make money? So there's those two sides of it. I think, as Kieran said, planning can be an enabler of that. So these policy changes are a really positive step. So there's one thing that the policy changes. The other thing is just actually the physical constraints. So some of these office buildings actually are posing real challenges to being converted to resi. Everything from, ceiling heights in offices might not be quite high enough to create kind of a good quality home within them. The floor plates, the depth, or the kind of the huge size of those office floor plates means that naturally, you want to create residences around the edge with the natural light of the windows. You're often then left with this huge expanse of space within the middle around the core that's very far from the windows, so you don't get the natural light. So then there's questions around, do you create residential units around the edge with the light? And then what happens to the middle? Do you use it for storage, or do you just kind of cut a big atrium down? And that's where the kind of economics comes into it, but also the social factors of saying, well, if this building is redundant anyway, is it worth exploring? I think the environmental question then comes in, that obviously there's the positive of how do we retrofit and repurpose these buildings rather than knocking down and rebuilding. We all know that the built environment sector is one of the biggest contributors to the environmental crisis that we're experiencing. However, there's things around really also thinking about, on the one hand, bringing down the embodied carbon by reusing existing building, but actually when you take a step back and look at the whole life carbon, sometimes it is actually better to knock down and rebuild a much more sustainable building for the future. So I think there's planning is key, as Kieran said. There's other factors involved, but I think that that bigger picture, if we come back to that idea of how do we rethink the city centre as a whole, I think the imperative is there to create more mixed use. You go beyond the CBD, the central business district, and there's different terms, the central social district, the central living district, whatever term we want to coin. But it's really about saying, how do we create more vibrant city centres? And a huge part of that has got to be about bringing people in to live. Then you just get a mixed use environment where you've not just got those office workers. So it's great, as Cal said, we were seeing this rise again of people coming back to the office. But actually, until you have residents who live there, who are going to activate the place across the day, across the week, across the weekend, and create a much richer kind of user base of people there, which in turn builds this ecosystem. As I said before, the fragile ecosystem of services that just cater to office workers. Once you get residents there, you get all of the amenities and services that cater to a much wider group of people, that creates a much more resilient place as a whole.
And I think that's definitely something we're seeing in the work that we're doing in terms of reinventing city centres or town centres, is actually delivering mixed-use, residential-led mixed-use schemes, whether they're build-to-rent-led mixed-use schemes, and sort of repositioning that retail and leisure offer and the commercial offer, but actually, like you're saying, attracting in those residents, being in some of the most sustainable locations to deliver development. It sort of makes sense to optimise those city centre locations to deliver a really good quality environment for people to live in as well. So yeah, we're certainly sort of seeing those projects and working on them. There's many examples of them across the country as well that are coming forward. And I think one of the important things, I think, as well, as part of that process is actually that, you know, these spaces need to be inclusive, and they need to bring in the local communities as well that live there. So I think a really important part of that process and sort of reimagining spaces is also responding to the needs and requirements of the local communities, bringing them in to reshape that. So it really is sort of a place for everyone. And, you know, planning, again, can help sort of enable and facilitate that as part of its role in placemaking. So yeah, I think that's, yeah, multi-use, multifunctional, multi-experience centre for everyone.
So quite a shift from what we have been used to over the years. I would love to throw in one question, and perhaps, Cal, you can start with this one. The first question from Taz was, what role does technology play in the future of city centres? What are your thoughts along those lines?
It's a great question, and thanks, Taz, and a good timing for bringing it in, Alex. I was just thinking about what Kieran was saying about, you know, bringing diversity, and also Rosie of residents back into the city. What we're doing is we've actually created our own synthetic data set, which is like a anonymized version of a census, basically. And what that means is obviously respecting people's data privacy, which we obviously treat with the utmost respect. But it's this incredible data set that can sort of probabilistically look at the type of people that live in different areas across different cities, and enables us to like filter and search for different types of people that match different criteria. So an example of how we're using that at the moment is to actually identify households that would likely qualify for affordable housing, which in Australia, I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK, is, you know, really just income tested mostly. That's the main sort of criteria, that you have to be low to moderate income earners to qualify for affordable housing. So we can actually search and identify those people. We're also looking at where they've been displaced from. So CBD centres being, you know, expensive places to live, and where have they actually been, you know, forced to migrate to due to affordability, and actually starting to identify and even sort of profile those people based on psychographic personas. So what sort of, you know, amenity and services and experiences will resonate with those people? You know, how much transport time will it save for them getting to their place of work? Some of those people who are essential workers and key workers have to travel at night, so there's safety concerns from travelling long distance away into CBD environments where, you know, health precincts are, for example. So there's all of these different considerations that we're actually using these different data sets to help analyse and you know, I guess help put forward case studies, again, inform and support those decisions to say, I mean, we all know there's a need for more affordable housing, but what type of affordable housing, how many one-bedroom apartments versus two-bedroom apartments, helping inform and support those apartment mix design to actually then get in and brief the architects and the city planners on, you know, where is the actual demand coming from? Who are these people? Likewise, in the build-to-rent space, which is really just emerging in Australia, we're looking to the UK and the US, but also, you know, Australia is a different place. So who are these people? What type of people are going to actually rent these build-to-rent developments? There's only, I don't know, 10 or 14 or something that have actually been delivered in Australia so far. There's a huge pipeline coming. So it's a pretty exciting sector for us to, you know, to take learnings from yourselves and look at those case studies overseas. So we're helping to, you know, profile those people. But something else that we're doing is back to the city centres. And again, I might just share my screen again. Is that we've used these things, mobile devices. And again, it's all de-identified data, so we don't have any personal information that we're actually collecting on individual devices, never tracking individual devices, we're aggregating that data. But what we've done is we'll geo-fence an office building, so in this case, Australia Square, which you can see a picture of there. So the polygon that we've drawn around it is that circle, so it's the building perimeter. And what we're doing is picking up a sample of de-identified mobile devices from within that building, but then we're running our algorithms over it to look for devices that are typically there Monday to Friday. It doesn't have to be every day with hybrid working for long periods of time, and then segmenting the devices into the office workers, probabilistically based on those patterns of mobile phone usage and pings essentially on their phone, to likely be workers versus a visitor that's going to the food court at the bottom of this building for an hour at lunchtime each day. So we're putting the visitors aside. And then we're actually looking at the office workers. How far do they walk for their daily needs on average when they actually leave the building? And what we found is office workers in CBD environments, it's not just Sydney, we've analysed CBDs around Australia, we found that 7 minutes is really the maximum distance that office workers will walk for their day-to-day needs. And that's represented by this blue line called an isochrone. And you can see it's impacted by physical barriers like the Western Distributor running through here, which is a major freeway running through the Sydney CBD, so it shortens it there. There's Circular Quay, there's the Opera House if anyone's interested up there. And so what we're doing then is actually defining a catchment area, think about it like a trade area for a shopping centre, for CBD environments being this 7-minute area. And then what we're doing is looking at, well, what type of retail amenity is currently provided in and around that building. So for the owners of office buildings, they're thinking a lot more outside the bricks and the mortar and the glass of the office tower, understanding their precinct. Now, this building's located in the Sydney city core. So again, you can see all of that retail amenity. Those different coloured dots are classified by retail category here. And what we're actually doing is, counting the number of retail businesses. We're assessing the breadth of retail services. So there could be 40 or 50 different retail categories provided for within that 7-minute walk. And we're actually giving buildings or their precincts a rank out of 10. So this is an 8.1 out of 10. Another way to think about that is, the top 19% of all office buildings in the Sydney CBD. There's about 600 different 7-minute catchment areas that we've analysed, and can start to actually identify different gaps. Like, this is a great location for retail, so it's scoring very high, hence all the green colours in all of those categories. But it can also identify deficiencies and gaps in terms of not only retail amenity, we look at public amenity, social infrastructure, to help actually use this data to help inform that decision making and the mixed use that we're already talking about in this session, to think, well, okay, if I'm a building owner here, I can't just be working in isolation anymore. I need to be working with the other building owners, the city council and planners, to think about the type of amenity to help, reinvigorate these precincts that are, probably deficient in certain areas that, that Rosie mentioned before. Places like, Docklands in Melbourne, for example, which is probably a bit like your Canary Wharf, where large big space office users move down there, and a lot of those sort of service amenity, like the key cutters and the shoe shine and the dry cleaners, have closed up shop because of hybrid working, and so there is some retail vacancy down there, but that is undergoing a change at the moment as well.
I just think that is such a fascinating tool. I think in so many ways, I think it's a really useful tool for clients to, when they're making location decisions, to actually say, okay, I want to locate there because that's going to create a great local environment for my people. And actually, Alex, to your world, talking about talent attraction and retention, occupiers and businesses want to be in those great places that are going to make their people want to come and work for them and want to come into work every day. So I think that's amazing on that front. I think the other thing it shows, certainly it will highlight the areas of opportunity that are going to need rethinking. Those areas that sit in the voids where actually they don't have this active place around them. Those are the places we should start concentrating and say, here's an opportunity to create something new because this place is on the decline. But I also think that whole idea of the 7-minute kind of catchment goes back to that point I said right at the very beginning. These ecosystems are really fragile. If people are going into the office and they only get 7 minutes away and then they go home, you get these centres which really aren't going to be very resilient. So again, not to sound like a broken record, but all of this is pointing towards this real need to just create these much richer environments that serve more than just the office worker.
I think the office building itself needs to sort of do a lot as well, and probably a lot more than it did. So I think, the point about the amenities around it is sort of a really relevant one, but it's actually when you walk into your office building, what is that building doing itself in its own right when you're walking into it, and the experience that you have, and want to be enticed to go back into the office and have a nice working environment, a really high-end working environment, and it to be pleasant. And does that is that more exceptional than what you can get at home? It's got to bring you in there as well. So I think it's that the office building as well and how that performed, but also the context that it's in as well. That it's the two kind of need to go together to make those to make it work most powerfully and successfully. And I think that's what we're seeing in London, where the congregation of the most successful office spaces are sort of clustering together, and that's where we're seeing some of these office buildings and sort of the more peripheral edges fade away effectively. So it's driving people to those most successful places for office functions. And the standards requirements, especially from an environmental perspective, are being pushed in terms of the aspirational and how they operate from a energy efficient point and climate change perspective as well. So I think it's multiple different factors, I think, that go towards that.
I think this idea of the flight to quality, which is what lots of people have coined that phrase here. Again, it's saying that office occupiers are going to that quality, and as you say, the quality is the building itself, everything around it, because it's that whole experience. There's also lots of talk around earn the commute. We don't have to go into offices anymore. How do you make people want to? In the same way, you don't have to shop in a physical shop anymore. But how do you incentivize people to do so? You need to create an experience that is so different to what you get from home that it competes on a different level. And it's understanding that people sort of design their week around going in on certain days because of everything that offers. But actually, if it offers nothing greater than the convenience of sitting at home, then we're not going to earn the commute. And so again, a key role of city centres is to interact, yes, transact in terms of work, but interact with people, benefit from the richness of city life, which is more than just walking straight into an office every day.
We have actually proven, using the worker activity data that I started sharing, the link between worker activity. So office buildings with higher retail amenity scores, the second thing that I shared, of 7 and above, have higher worker activity than office buildings with retail amenity of 7 or below 7, I should say. Also public amenity. So public amenity, access to open space, public transport, entertainment, all of these other factors as well. We found office buildings with 7 or above public amenity scores within that 7-minute neighbourhood are also successfully attracting their workers back than those buildings with lower scores. We've also proven the flight to quality that was talked about years ago. Is we've seen it in rents and leasing deals, but we've also seen it in worker activity as well. That those higher grade buildings, which are typically in those better areas anyway. So look, there's so many variables that are impacting return to office. We've been able to tick off a few that we know and have been able to prove that relationship. Interestingly, distance from the office and earning the commute is one that we still haven't been able to nail. And it's quite strange because you think that people who live further away, they're going to return to the office, less than people that live on the doorstep. But we've partnered with this incredible research company, Roy Morgan in Australia, and they've developed psychographic profiles, so a customer segmentation model that breaks the Australian population into 54 different psychographic personas. And we've actually seen a strong relationship between different types of personas returning to the office compared to distance from the office. So people who are aspirational, who want to be the first in the office and last to leave because they believe that's going to help them in their career, driving from places that are further away to the CBD to get into work. So it's more, cultural values, attitudes, belief, behaviour driven, whereas some of the inner city, think they've got a different term for it, but think hipsters living on the edge of the city in, expensive apartments. In places like Melbourne, we didn't see them coming back as strongly, even though they're living sort of 10 or 15 minutes away from the office, yet in Sydney they were. So there's so many different variables at play that I think psychographics are actually quite interesting. We're also learning about office tenants and what type of amenity services and experiences in their building will help attract particular different types of cohorts back to the building. So if you're trying to attract tech workers or bankers or lawyers, we can actually help use those psychographic insights to help inform those workplace strategies, occupier strategies, leasing strategies, and things like that. I'm rabbiting on about too much data. Better ask another question.
No, look, really insightful, Cal, and apologies. I think I went offline for a second there, so sorry if I missed a bit. But yeah, I mean, we've had something else to consider, and Jorg mentions it here. And hi, Jorg. He's based out in Germany, but it's sort of the changing demographic of society as well. I mean, he mentions, in my view, despite any current commercial work interest, the age pyramid alone will ensure a continuous repopulation of the city centres. At the current birth rate, the population's average age in 2050 will be 65 in Germany, and probably not far off that in the UK. And I imagine that would be similar, across the world. In the developed world, and this group will bring considerable wealth, retail buying power back into the cities. No extinction, but are we likely to see a shift in building use? So that's also something to consider, is the changing demographic of society. Ultimately, there's going to be pressures on maybe the people working and that sort of thing as well. So what impact? How could that change the city? Is that are there more retirement homes and that sort of stuff going up? And what are your thoughts on the change of the demographic of society in that respect?
Well, speaking about the psychographics that I launched into before, there's the higher socioeconomic psychographic groups, so earn more money, typically own their own homes, live in wealthier areas, skew older than the general population. They're people who will travel into CBD centres to go to the best restaurants and entertainment precincts. We've done another study of a hospitality precinct in Flinders Lane, which in the Melbourne CBD has some of Australia's best restaurants and bars and hospitality venues. And, we saw a big shift from, Friday was always the busiest day pre-COVID in those venues. And we've, again, sort of studied the, mobile phone activity within, a group of these best restaurants in Flinders Lane in Melbourne. And we saw, of course, Friday was, the busiest day, followed by Thursday pre-COVID. We looked at it again in a post-COVID period, because we kept hearing this saying that Thursday is the new Friday in hospitality in the Melbourne CBD. So we thought, let's go and test it. And what we found out was Thursday stayed in second position post-COVID, which it was pre-COVID. But, Friday went from first position, down to third, and Saturday actually went to the top position post-COVID. So we actually saw really big increases on Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday went from seventh position to fourth position. In terms of its percentage of customers, if you think about, the 7 days of the week is 100%. So what we deduced from that was, because of hybrid working, they're working, but they're not in the office on Friday and Monday, they're more inclined to go into the CBDs on, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays, because they're working in the CBDs less. They're going in there more to take advantage of, those sort of entertainment, hospitality, leisure sort of activities. And I think, a large part of that, when we looked at the psychographic profile of that increase in those visitors, were those, skewing older, higher socioeconomic groups coming into the CBD as well. So it's a pretty long answer to say that, yeah, it's definitely already having an impact through, again, multiple factors. But that ageing population is certainly, spurring on those retailers, and they're making a lot of money apparently.
But I think there's also an opportunity here around, if we're thinking about the residential provision, if that's what we're, if that's an opportunity to try and drive these different dynamics of city centre by having residents there. The different types of residences that you provide cater more to different demographics, and yes, age group, and crudely you can look at different age groups, and I think that is important. But there's also, slightly to Cal's earlier point, there's also kind of groupings of people based on their values and what they're into, because one retired sort of 65-year-old is very different to another, and they may make very different life choices. But on the one hand, if we're providing more, and if we're seeing much more demand for build to rent type residences in city centres, so they naturally appeal to a younger audience who aren't maybe yet ready to commit to kind of buying a forever home, but they want the flexibility, but also they want the quality of a residence, of living in a build to rent type unit, type accommodation. So, naturally by building more of those in city centres, that's the sort of audience you're going to attract. But mixing that with a range of other types of residences is going to ensure that kind of real mix. And I think the retired population is a really interesting one. I think traditionally, we might have thought of people that when they retire, they might move somewhere quieter and have a quieter life. I think increasingly we're seeing these kind of, the urban population of retirees. This is their time to actually enjoy the city. It's their time. They're not working. What can they do? They can go and experience the culture, experience all of the provisions and the richness that a city centre gives. So actually by providing residences in the city centre, that's an amazing opportunity to bring them back in. Yes, bring their expenditure back in, but also then as they age even more, I think that we've had in the UK anyway, and Cal, I don't know what it's like out there in this sense, but you don't really see many kind of elderly people in city centres because they're quite harsh environments as we currently have them. Whereas you go to the continent and actually there's really great networks of elderly people who live right in the heart of the city centre because it really caters to them. It's compact, it's dense, it's got everything they need within a close proximity. There's great public transport. There's a range of amenities within reach as opposed to living isolated in the middle of nowhere and not having any support. So I think, again, if we go back to what a great urban centre can really be, which is providing that mix, then also we cater to every different age range. And I think that's, again, just going back to how we create these better places by having sort of diversity, vibrancy, all of that.
I think that draws on. Sorry, Alex.
I was just going to say, like what you were saying there, Rosie, in terms of the elderly population. There's obviously a big problem there in the UK anyway of, people living on their own in their elderly years and being stuck there with no one around them and suffering great mental health and well-being issues.
York just says that actually in his question or his note.
Oh, excellent. Sorry, I didn't see that, but yeah. So I suppose that's that there's an opportunity there to address some underlying social issues that we have as we are set up at the moment, rather than thinking of the decline of the city centre. You touched on it at the very beginning, Rosie. What are the opportunities there of the issues that we have that we can perhaps resolve by reinventing the city centres? Sorry, Kieran, I was interrupting.
Well, I was just going to just talk about just connecting that to one of my comments I made earlier around inclusivity and how I think, as Rosie is saying, sort of making spaces for everyone, but such build-to-rent communities, etc., can be intergenerational, and by the way that they're modelled and organised in terms of being, the benefit of being, like a standard C3 sort of residential product, as we call it, in the UK, but actually having the benefit of shared communal spaces and a managed product, and what that brings with it in terms of, touching on items like you said about loneliness and creation of that community within the building as well. I think that does definitely have a role to play in creating sort of intergenerational communities within city centres. And I think also, I guess it's our perception of what we take retired living to be. And as Rosie was saying, people that are retired are very active and, can most definitely benefit from the positives of living in that city centre environment. And I guess that becomes in the space in terms of, living for and demographic versus supported living versus, people who need sort of really supported accommodation and, health provisions to enable them to live. So that I guess there's a different sort of spectrum around, what a retired living community is, but there's definitely value for that. And I think especially as cities become greener with more pockets of green spaces, etc., it's sort of a more positive living environment for creating a intergenerational, multi-generational community.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, another area of society that we could probably improve in terms of that intergenerational interaction and that sort of stuff. And another point which we haven't sort of touched on, and I just be interested to get your thoughts on, is sort of the future impact of transportation developments and things like that. I'm thinking like, a smart, if we finally have the smart cars that are driving us everywhere, what impact does that have on, on a city centre? Can we, if I can just get in my car and press go and maybe even have a laptop to work from, I could go wherever I like. I mean, how does that change, how things are designed or how we operate?
The first thing that comes to my mind is all of these multi-story car parks, like in office buildings or standalone car parks in all of the city centres. And speaking about repurposing, you've probably looked at them too, Rosie, but years ago we were thinking about this, and unfortunately a lot of the floors go like this, the ceiling heights, and they're not easily repurposed, those things, into alternative uses. There are some examples from around the world that, again, this is years ago that I looked at, but you think about those sites just as a starting point to think we just don't need to park these cars anymore to drive in and drive out from work. So I think that is going to be a huge impact. It's going to happen. It's just a question of when.
I mean, interesting on that front, and it's, again, a principle we should think about when we're designing anything new in a city, is what's its ability to evolve in future. A couple of the schemes I'm working on, residential-led schemes where there is the question of car parking, and they're saying, to attract people tomorrow when this is built, we need to provide an element of car parking, so a certain number of car parking spaces, and that's determined by various factors, a lot of it through planning that Kieran will probably talk about. But it's saying, but actually in 10 years' time, a load of those going to be made redundant. So if there are multi-story car parks provided as part of that development, or car parking spaces, surface level, it's also having a plan for day two of saying, how do we evolve that? So if it is multi-level, it's saying, let's build the ceiling heights now. Let's create a structure that is actually going to be resilient to change and adapt. And actually in 10 years' time, half of this building can then become a residence when we no longer need so many car parking spaces. So again, that principle of thinking now about long-term evolution, so that whatever we're designing today can also work for tomorrow. And I would like to think that the conversation around transport and transportation city centres goes beyond cars, and it's actually much more focused on the real opportunity of a city centre with its kind of compact, dense, it's public transport, but it's also walking and cycling. How do we create these city centres that are great places to walk around and to cycle around, and that's the advantage of a city centre. So the kind of micro mobility and public transport at a small scale is really what we should be designing for now, I think.
I think we're definitely seeing that, and in some of the sites and projects that are coming forward to us is actually how are we going to reuse this brownfield or previously developed land that are car parks that are in great locations in town and cities, for the role and purpose that they did provide in the past, and how can they be utilised now? And that's not saying that that wouldn't involve sort of demolition and rebuild. I think sort of on that front, I think it is really sort of working out what is the right response for each site and in terms of what you do. But most certainly in terms of reusing those sites, and actually, reduction in cars, definitely, and promoting that cleaner, greener environment for people to enjoy. I think it's sort of a shift in sort of mentality and mindset. I think when you kind of go through planning where people potentially have that sort of reliance on the car, and actually how do you kind of help people think forward to say, and accept that they can go about doing activities, etc., without having that comfort of that car, when such environments are capable of being utilised sort of without the car. And I think it's that shift that I think is the kind of tricky part to eventually lead to that point, as you were saying, Rosie, in the future, where it will just become normal that the first thing you think about, if I want to get like some milk from the shop, is that I will walk there. I don't need to go in the car, because my instinct and my initial reaction is just to walk. And it's kind of trying to normalise that, I think, as much as possible.
Also, if the place was inherently mixed use anyway, then it would be very local anyway. The whole idea around 15-minute neighbourhood or 50-minute city, I think it's more about neighbourhood. Everything should be within a 50-minute walk or cycle anyway. The things that you need day to day. Of course, you're going to travel further afield for those kind of the bigger purchases or the bigger activities. But why would you need to get in your car if you can just walk down the street to get your milk?
I still know many people that do that in my kind of local area, and we have got sort of a plethora of places to shop. But it's changing people's habits, I think, and sort of you take it away from them, then they're kind of forced to make change. So I think that's sort of part of it. But I agree. You should be walking.
I'm just wondering over there whether you went through the same phenomenon that we did here of the end of trip facilities about 10 years ago in office buildings. And it was like an arms race amongst office landlords who could build the best shower and bicycle parking facility. And the war is still raging. And the funniest thing was seeing tenant representatives and occupiers who might be, CEOs of companies, having been on 3 inspections and just looking blankly at us saying, why does everyone just want to take us straight to the bathrooms for the first inspection? So it was just one of those great moments in property where we get caught up in our own world and confuse the industry. But as a result, I mean, there's so much bicycle parking in any new development in Australia. And the quality of those facilities is just absolutely outstanding to help encourage that not only return to office, but certainly cycling. And all of our cities have put in a lot of different cycling lanes throughout as well, which has been a huge progression over the last 10 years.
Amazing. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical issues. I keep on getting kicked off of my network. So, thanks for keeping things going while I'm not here. So, thanks so much for panelists for that. But well, look, we're coming to the end of the discussion now, and I was thinking perhaps we've talked about maybe the new makeup of city centres of the future. I'd be interested maybe just to get your sort of wrapping up of some of the things we've said there. What do you think that makeup looks like? Obviously, it needs to diversify. What will this future of the city centre be, in your opinion? Obviously, I'm not going to.
I think in Australian cities, definitely residential and affordable housing. There's so much momentum and built well. Gathering, the repurposing of office buildings into residential, similarly in Australia, as Rosie had said before, is just like Property Council of Australia, which is a pretty incredible industry body here, commissioned a study just to identify a whole bunch of office buildings that could potentially be converted to residential. And I think that was released 3 or 6 months ago now to actually start that process. So we're still a long way away, but I think personally that will be another major shift. And that's not something that's new to our cities. With the donut city of the 1990s and cafe society, it happened in the 90s in Melbourne and Sydney, and I think we'll see another cycle of that happening in the next 10 years.
What about the UK and other parts of the world, Kieran and Rosie? What are your thoughts on how the city centre might look in the future?
From my perspective, I think it definitely is give that mixed use environment, but cities are sort of places for people, and I think if people are at heart of creating that foundation for how they are going to be in the future, then I think that if we respond to those changing needs and requirements, and the cities are sort of flexible and adaptable enough to be resilient to respond to those needs and changes. And so we touched on sort of that aging demographic, and how can we bring that into the mix. And if we keep sort of thinking about how we can create better places for everyone and the multiple different needs and uses and functionality and experiences that people want from cities, then all of those things will continually sort of evolve and renew what those cities and spaces should be. Appreciate that's not a direct answer, but
no.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that is good to get. I mean, do you have anything to add, Rosie, before we go?
I think they both covered it all. I mean, I'm basically in agreement. Really, richer diversity of uses, richer diversity of people, and focused around people. A great place for people that people want to come and live, work, enjoy the space, and momentarily slightly take the focus off driving the highest values all the time, but by creating a more vibrant centre, in turn that's going to create a more sustainable and economically sustainable place as well. Creating great places, that's where people are going to want to be. If you don't, we risk this kind of doom loop that I mentioned earlier, and potentially the extinction of the title. So we need to innovate, or else we do face that extinction, I think.
And we're already seeing that in those little pockets, those 7-minute walking catchment areas in your city. You think about, the Flinders Lane example in Melbourne that I mentioned before. It's adjacent to some really high quality office towers. That area of the city has always been fine. It's going to continue to be fine. We know what that is. It's, entertainment, leisure, and office, and workers, as we saw, are returning back to the office. It's those other those other pockets, those small little pockets of the CBD that don't know who they are yet. They're trying to rediscover their identity, that maybe have had B-grade office buildings and the workers aren't returning and the retail has dropped off. I think they're the areas that we really, really need to focus on and help through, hopefully through, some data insights as a starting point, but it's not a silver bullet. It never is. It's art and science, placemaking and planning. And I think that's, they're the areas that we've really got to focus on that are still in that transition.
Fantastic. Well, look, thanks for joining us today. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I mean, it is really exciting where where the city centre is going. With that flux, the pressures that we have on the city centre, but the opportunity there in terms of improving the environment, the social situation you talk about in terms of elderly isolation and that sort of stuff. I mean, it's a great opportunity, and actually maybe that is a utopia we can all work towards. So look, thanks so much for the insight. Love the data as well, Cal. So it's really interesting to see that. And but yeah, thanks everyone for joining us and for all the questions. I'm sorry if I didn't manage to field one of your questions, but yeah, please do join us on the next one. So thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.